Okay, so we're going to begin tonight. Is a very important topic. Emunah Amud HaChochmot. Faith in God being the pillar of all wisdom. We're in the middle of a very important series of topics dealing with challenges, trials, struggles of the 21st century. And as we mentioned last week, atheism is one of them. A great amount of people are struggling to figure out the meaning of life. They may not intentionally be looking for meaning of life, but indirectly they are struggling. And the struggle has to do with not having a purpose in life, not having a clear direction. Atheism has problems, of course, and we dealt with that separately. And I mentioned that it is a delusion. It is the biggest delusion of mankind because it's an escape. It's an easy escape from assuming certain responsibilities, from wanting to lead a purposeful life. And I'm not going to repeat all the reasons of why it is an escape. That was covered in the last lecture. But many people who heard that lecture may come to the conclusion, but wait a minute, so is religion. So is faith in God. Perhaps that's also delusional, as many would like to claim. Well, obviously, it will take more than just one lecture to realize that there's a big difference between faith in God and the exact opposite, the lack of faith in God. What we need to understand here is, why is faith in God so important? I'm not going to try to prove faith in God in this lecture. We've already spoken about that in other lectures. There's a wealth of information about how one can see evidence in creation that points to a creator. We still need to know, however, what value is there in the faith of God. So let's begin with the words of Maimonides, the Rambam, in the very beginning of his very important masterpiece, the Code of Laws, of Judaic laws, Yad HaChazakah. He states as follows: Ki yesod ha-yesodot ve'amud ha-chochmot leida sheyesh shem matzui. It is the foundation of all foundations. And the pillar of all wisdom is to know that there is a supreme being, a creator, a force out there that brought everything into existence. So he calls that a foundation of all foundations. He calls that the pillar of all wisdom. What that means is that this is the beginning. This is from where we have to start. This needs to be an assumption. Even though we may not know it very, very well, we need to make that assumption. Later on, I will explain how it's not just an assumption. It's not just a belief, not a blind belief, but it is something that we need to know. He says so clearly, Leida. We need to not just believe blindly, but to know it for a fact. But not everyone begins knowing something as a fact. You begin assuming, you begin believing, and eventually, hopefully, one will know with certainty and with clarity that this is a fact. But he says that this is a foundation. Why is this called a foundation? What is a foundation? Why is a foundation important? When you're building a structure, you need to take into account that the taller the building, the deeper the foundation. A foundation is very important if we want the building to not fall down. We want it to last for a long time. Foundation is just a fact, something that is necessary in order to make sure that this edifice that we're building, this structure, will stay where it is for many years to come. That hopefully not even an earthquake will bring it down. No storm will shatter it. In the same way, we take this into consideration when building a physical structure. The same is true, or should be true, and should apply with the formation of the human being. We all know that the human being takes time to form, takes time to develop, whereas many, many animals, almost right after birth, they're running around. They are somewhat still dependent on their mothers. Some are more dependent for a longer time, but many of them within a short time, they're pretty much on their own. Man is different. From the time he's a baby, an infant, a toddler, until he's an adult, he goes through various stages. He's very much not on his own. He's always in need of his parents. He may think he knows everything, as many kids do. They think they know it all. But when they mature and when they settle down, when that formation takes place, not only physically but mentally, then they realize all kinds of things that they didn't know before. Then perhaps they even admit that they were wrong and that they've made mistakes. Life teaches. We have many experiences in life. Life can be a good teacher. But we would rather not learn from our mistakes. Wouldn't it be better to learn from others' mistakes? Wouldn't it be better if we were able to know exactly what to do in the very beginning without having to figure everything out on our own? But that's not the way it always works out. Sometimes, however, there's a combination. Certain things we learn, certain things we take the advice of others, and certain things we end up learning on our own. Nonetheless, there's no doubt about it that in order for the formation of the human being to maximize its potential, in order for it to be strong, firm, steady, so that he can meet all the challenges that are waiting for him in life, he will be helped greatly if he has a strong foundation of morals and values. And when I say morals and values, I'm not talking about morals or values that are man-made. They need to be eternal values. Eternal values from a God. As the verse says, Reshit Chochmah Yirat Hashem, the beginning of all wisdom is the fear of God. Because if the fear of God is what is guiding us, we will be led in a certain direction. If there's no fear of God, we will be led in a different direction. We want to be led in the right direction, in the best direction. Now, I know that a lot of people are going to say it as follows. There are a lot of good people in this world that are good-natured, fine people, that are careful in how they treat others, respectful, without God in their life, without religion. It's true. In other words, they don't have a book of values that they follow. They're just good by nature. Yes, it's true. There are people who are gentle souls, sensitive, fine people, righteous, angels, without religion. I'm not saying that without religion you cannot be a good person. Of course, a person can convince himself to be what he wants to be. He's not a puppet. The human being has free will. He can choose what he wants to be. And depending, of course, on how strong his evil inclination is, depending on his upbringing, the home, the teachers, the friends, the school, the environment, all of that will contribute to molding his personality. You know, we all have certain tendencies, and there are certain children who, by nature, are just very giving. Yes, but man doesn't live forever, and he cannot transmit those values necessarily to his kids or grandchildren. He, on his own, may live a good life, a decent life. But what we're talking about here is a foundation for mankind. We're talking about a set of morals, of values, that's based on something that hopefully will be good for eternity, for all times. And without God, without the faith in God, it is very difficult for man, who's fragile, who's not perfect, and we all know that, to come up on his own with some sort of constitution, if you want to call it, that will be good for all generations to come. Look at the United States of America, what the fathers of this country had in mind, and what Congress is doing today. In other words, what the mentality of society in this country is today. It's very different. What was wrong back then is acceptable today. And there are many, many examples, which I'd rather not go into right now. People change. Their values, therefore, change. Their laws, their man-made laws change. These are not divine laws. This is not God-given. A lot, of course, of what man has adapted is from the Bible. It just happens to be in a religious country or where religion had some level of influence. They have adapted some biblical laws. A lot of these laws make sense to them. Do they always follow them? Not necessarily. But they can live with it. It makes sense to them. It has worked for them, of course. They're divine in nature. So man has adapted to certain laws, or has accepted, I should say, certain laws that are biblical in nature, but nonetheless, he chooses not to believe in God. In other words, the laws somewhat make sense to him. He's being choosy about what he accepts and what he doesn't accept. The need, however, for a divine law is for the following reason. There's another verse in Iyov, in the book of Job, that says, Ayir pere yulad adam. When man is born, he's like a wild donkey, unrefined in character. Man is semi-animal, but not completely. He is endowed with a divine soul. According to our tradition, man is not just an animal. He has free will, whereas animals operate by instinct. They don't decide whether something is right or wrong. It's pure instinct. Man, being the crown of creation, has the ability to make decisions. Along with decisions come responsibilities, of course. We have to know right from wrong. And how are we going to know right from wrong? Just based on what human beings decide? It doesn't work out too well. Why do we have wars? Because what is right here is wrong there. They're not in agreement about something. That's usually one reason for war. So because man is unrefined when he's born, and he grows, and eventually becomes an adult with many responsibilities, he could be dangerous. He could be dangerous to society, he could be dangerous to himself. If he's unrefined, if he remains unrefined. Physical growth is easy. Just feed him a little bit of cereal with milk, and he'll be 7 foot tall, if it's in his genes. You don't need that much to contribute to one's physical growth. He'll get there somehow. But spiritual growth, refinement of character, where man can really become refined in his character, become a better person, where he can contribute a lot more to society, live a purposeful life, and have a good home, a family, all the good things that everybody would like to have. It requires a lot of work. And if there's no foundation, there's nothing to motivate him for that, except that people want to succeed. Everybody wants to succeed in life. People want to have a home, people want to have a job, people want to have a good, solid marriage. Yeah, but do you have the foundation for that? Do you have what it takes to succeed? In business, you may have a PhD or whatever. You may have some degree, you may have some know-how, and you may have a lot of mazal, which people forget about. You need to have good luck. You need to have the mazal behind you to succeed. A lot of people are very smart, but they don't have mazal. A lot of people are not smart at all, and they make a lot of money. So mazal is always going to be part of success when it comes to areas of finances and so forth.
The whole life.
Yes, in life in general, to succeed in life, but to succeed as a human being, that requires decision making all the time. That is where free will comes in. And there's a whole lecture just about that. Where do we have free will? Where we don't have free will. But since man does have free will, and he's not just an animal, he doesn't just operate by instinct, he needs guidelines, he needs rules. And we all know that this is true because we accept the rules of the police, we accept the rules of the government, we live by these rules. Hopefully we don't break the law, right? And could you imagine if you're on the freeway and somebody decided to erase all the dividing marks? It would be chaotic. There would be more accidents. There has to be some system that regulates traffic. There has to be some system that regulates society, taxation, and everything. I mean, there's a need for all of this. These are things that are acceptable, that make sense to us, even though a lot of people don't like it. They don't like too much government. I can understand it a little bit. But there's definitely some need for human beings to have a certain law and order, as we call it. Otherwise, there's anarchy. When there's no law and order, there's anarchy. And why is there anarchy? Because man reverts to his real animal. He can easily revert to that without God. There's always going to be those that are going to claim, but wait a minute, in the name of God, many people were murdered too. Okay, I'm not going to try to answer every question right now. I mean, we will deal with these kinds of questions when we talk about religions in a week or two from now. What do they have in common? What they don't have in common? Why are there so many religions? A very interesting topic in itself that we'll be talking about separately. Right now, it's just about the foundation. Faith in God, not necessarily what faith, or how you express it, or how you worship, that doesn't matter right now. Just the belief in God in itself is important, because that already reminds us that life is purposeful. There's meaning to everything. God did not just create a world without any reason. It doesn't make sense for him to do that. If he created it, then there's something that he wants of us, which I'm going to get to next. The problem is that man makes constant mistakes. He on his own, left to himself, without any guide, is going to make many, many mistakes. And even though he will come up with these laws that are necessary to regulate his life, to regulate society, mistakes happen. Why do mistakes happen? Because, as we said before, man is not perfect. Man does not know it all. And things change. So he can never come up with a set of rules that will be good for everyone and for all times. Many of man's experiments, if we can call it that, ways of life, have failed. Take the example of communism, which many, many people believed in and perhaps still do. It didn't work out. It failed. It's man-made. Anything that is man-made does not have the chance to succeed if it's in the area of morals and values. Building a good car, building a good airplane that will hopefully make it to its destination, man has shown tremendous, I guess you can call it prowess or insight and skill in how to build these beautiful pieces of technology. Yes, and even then, there's trial and error, mistakes happen, and they learn from those mistakes, and hopefully the next time around, they build something better. That's exactly what happened with the shuttle, right? With the two shuttles, actually. That mistakes happen for some reason, but they learn from the mistakes and they correct, hopefully, the mistakes for next time. But that's the nature of the human being. We're not perfect. We need to recognize at all times that we can make a mistake. Now, is it bad to make a mistake? No. As long as you correct it, as long as you learn from it, that's fine. In marriage, husband and wife make mistakes. But if they admit it, right, they pick up the pieces, they start from scratch. They say, I'm sorry, let's not repeat the mistake. So it is human nature to err, to make mistakes. However, if the foundation is a solid foundation, it will be easier for us to admit our faults, to admit those mistakes, to make sure it doesn't happen again. That's what the foundation of the fear of God means. That we recognize that there's a supreme being who's aware of our actions, who because of our awareness of him, it means that we have to be responsible and accountable for what we do. Not just to other human beings, but to him too. It's going to make a world of a difference in how we live our life. This does not guarantee that one who has faith in God and is religious is not going to commit a crime. So a lot of people are going to ask this question, but wait a minute, I know a lot of people who are religious and they're no good. And I know some people who are not religious who are even better than them. It has nothing to do with religion, whether one will choose through his free will to commit a crime or not, to be a good person or not. Religion is not going to make the decision for him necessarily. It's a good, powerful anchor to hold us back from doing that which is wrong and for motivating us to do that which is right. But is it a guarantee? No. A lot of religious people who were brought up religious, who believe in God, have succumbed to their evil inclination. Why? Because they're not angels. Religion doesn't necessarily make you an angel. You have to choose to perfect yourself. You have to choose to continuously grow spiritually, to become a better person, a better husband, a better friend, honest in business. You have to make these decisions. They're not natural. They don't come by themselves. Yes, some people are just by nature better and honest and so forth, but usually for the average human being, who, as we said before, is unrefined, who's born as a wild mule, he's going to, throughout his life, be making decisions. This is not right. This is wrong. I was at fault here. It was my fault, my mistake. This is not true. You know, all of this requires a certain amount of sincerity, courage, willpower. And what helps? If the foundation is there, the foundation of belief in God. Otherwise, it's possible, but it's much more difficult. And even if you accomplish it without the belief in God, can you give it over to your kids? They're going to have to start from scratch. There needs to be something for mankind that will teach them the proper way, right from wrong. Now, but wait a minute. That's assuming God created the world. Right? We already made that assumption. A lot of people are not holding there yet. They might say, yes, this is true, this makes some sense, but that's assuming God created the world. Who told you that God created the world? Right? So obviously, this requires a little bit more investigation. These words, what I'm communicating right now, are intended for those who already have some degree of clarity. That, you know what, it makes sense that this world came about through creation, purposeful, and that did not just happen by itself. Once I believe that, I don't know it, but I believe it, then I guess I can take the next step and prove to myself that this God must have communicated to mankind at some point what he wants of us. The Jewish people believed that he gave us the Torah, and that is our guide. He didn't just drop us down here, create us, bring us into this world of his, figure it out on your own. That doesn't make sense. God creates a world for a purpose. Doesn't he want us to take care of his world, not to destroy it? Wouldn't he tell us, wouldn't he share with us what he has in mind? That's what the Torah is. The Torah is God's message to humanity, but more so to the Jewish people. All the rest of the world also has a set of rules. They're called the 7 Noahide laws, the basics. We have a certain mission. Are we better? No, not necessarily. It's just we have a separate mission. A lot of people think that the Jew considers himself superior. That's very, very far from the truth. There are a lot of non-Jewish people out there who are so special, so good. And there are unfortunately some who are born Jewish but don't behave in a Jewish way, don't act in a Jewish way. And what does that prove? It only proves that human beings are fragile, human beings have free will, and they can decide what they want to be. Religion in itself, the faith in God, can help, but it can only help those who want to be helped. If one doesn't want to have anything to do with his faith, whether he's Jewish or not, then obviously he's left to his own instincts. Now, if those instincts are good, fine. It may just turn out that he will be somewhat of a good person. But if that human being is not refined, so without a solid foundation, he will not be maximizing his true potential. He will make many, many mistakes. It will be much more difficult for him to confront all kinds of challenges. What's a challenge? What if somebody had a job for a number of years, he has a large family, and all of a sudden he's fired? That's a challenge. Some who don't have a solid foundation in belief in God are going to say, wait a minute, where is God? How come he's doing this to me? He's being presented with a challenge. How are you going to face this challenge? What are you going to do? You have people committing suicide when they're under a tremendous amount of stress. There are many challenges in life, ups and downs. People go through all kinds of difficulties. No solid foundation, no faith in God, it's going to make a big difference. How are you going to confront it? Now, of course, you can get help. That may help, or may not. Faith in God helps. If it's properly placed, it could be a big help. We don't have the time to go into every single example of how people should meet these challenges. What does it mean if there's tragedy? There's a whole lecture about how to cope with adversity. There's a lecture about how to deal with the Holocaust. What does the Holocaust mean? Where was God in the Holocaust? Especially for the Jews. How do you explain it? So obviously, it's something that requires further learning. We cannot just answer it in 5 minutes. We will never know fully the ways of God, but we do know that there is some explanation for it. Just that we as human beings do not always, with our limited minds, know everything there is to know. It is impossible. But with the foundation there, it helps. It helps remind us that, wait a minute, God is good. God is kind. God has promised and delivered in the past. Why did this happen? Perhaps I should look further into it. Perhaps there's some answer lying somewhere in the Talmud, in the Medrash, in the Zohar, in the Kabbalah. We may not have the answers to all the questions, but we can ask somebody who may have the answer. We cannot just decide, well, I'm giving up. This doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't seem right to me. How could you make that decision that it doesn't seem right to you? It was right to your forefathers. It was right to all the generations who came before you. They were willing to give their lives for this. To them, this made sense, and to you not. Based on what? Based on this challenge that you cannot handle? Did you think about why you can't handle this challenge? Perhaps your foundation is weak. And if the foundation is weak, then obviously this building is going to come tumbling down. If there's a very powerful storm, and the Holocaust was a powerful storm, which knocked down, unfortunately, a lot of people's faith. Their faith was shattered or weakened. If one's root system is deeper, then that tree can hold. Even if very powerful winds blow at it, they will not bring it down. A strong or a deep root system, a solid foundation is what's necessary to be able to withstand many of the challenges. This faith in God is not only for the Jew. This faith in God applies to every human being because it reminds him that there is a boss. However, unfortunately, just to remember that there is a boss was not always enough to help people deal with all kinds of difficulties. And that leads us to the area called fideism or deism, where you have people in the past and even today who believe in a creator in the world, who believe that this world came about through creation, and perhaps even believe that one should believe in this God and have faith in God. But that's where it stops. They don't believe, or they don't know, and they never try to figure out if God has a relationship with human beings. It stops just with the belief in God. Yes, it makes sense to me that God created the world. It did not come about by itself. I believe in God, and that's it. Does God have a relationship with me? Does he know what's going on in my life? Does he get involved, intercede, which Judaism very, very much believes in? That God did not only create the world, but he's involved in every aspect of our life. That is a whole different area. So even though we said a strong foundation is very important, it can make a difference in a person's life, but it will not be enough. If it stops with just belief in God and does not continue or does not extend itself, that this God who created the world is also involved. He performs miracles. and therefore I don't give up. I have hope in him. This motivates us. This brings joy into our life. This gives us the strength not to despair in time of trouble. Because I know he's listening. If I pray to him, he might actually listen to me. You see where the difference is? Not just to believe in God, but to know that he's involved and he listens to our prayers. Why did they just stop with belief in God? Why didn't they continue investigating what does this God want from us? Just that God exists? Something is missing over here. The Rambam Maimonides explains that idol worshiping started off on the right track, but made a big mistake. And because of their mistake, they were misled and ended up worshiping idols instead of worshiping God. In the very beginning, he says, they worshiped God. They knew of God. But they also realized that God has servants. Many, many servants that carry out his will. And they said, well, if God has servants, we have to worship the servants too. And little by little, they only worshiped the servants and forgot about the boss. They gave all this respect to the servants, thinking that, they need to be worshipped as well. And that eventually caused them to forget about the source of everything, the ruler, the main ruler, which is God. That is how he explains idol worshiping began. So they began with the faith or with the believing in God, but got carried away to the point where they stopped believing in him and only believed in these idols, in these powers. What happened here? They did not internalize fully what is God in their life. What does it mean to believe in God? What does it mean that I believe in God? What is that? Is it just to believe that he created the world, or it's more than that? When one does not internalize what this belief in God is, it could easily be forgotten. Forgotten meaning that deep down you believe, yes, it makes some sense to you, but it has no effect on you. It doesn't have too much of an influence on you. It has to be internalized. Remember this word internalized, because I'm going to come back to it later on why belief in God needs to be internalized. Okay? So just remember this concept of internalizing the belief, not just having it in our head, that this is true, but making it a part of our life. In those days, we had idols. What do we have today? We also have a mistake that mankind has made by moving away from religion, which was the norm, which was the standard for many, many people in the world up until 200 years ago. Also, a mistake was made moving away from religion to secularism, to atheism. And today, the idols are evolution. This is their belief. It has become a belief. It has become dogma. It's not science. Now, I say this with confidence, obviously, because I've studied it. I wouldn't just make it up. And you don't have to take it from me. Just take it from scientists who are not creationists, scientists who do not believe in God, who said the same thing, that this evolution business is not factual. It's not based on real facts. It's just speculation. And it's very, very far from being even close to the truth, because statistically it's impossible. But I'm not going to get into all the arguments and discussions about this topic, because there's so much material available on the internet that you can see what the proponents of this theory say and what those who don't accept it have to say, and you can make your own decision. It's very, very obvious. If you look at it carefully and you don't get confused by all the details, which can easily happen to people who get confused by the details, and you look for facts versus, speculation, what has been proven scientifically and what has been not, what's missing and what's there, you can see that it is totally without any foundation. But that's for another time. You know, we don't have the time to repeat all the evidence that is out there for God and all the problems that exist with this theory of evolution. But those who want, there's so much out there, you know, that you can convince yourself. You don't need, you know, to just assume that what I say is true. You can figure it out yourself. It's very, very easy. Okay, so we began to say how faith in God is important. What's the proof in real life that it has been helpful? Is there any proof? Is there any evidence for it that it has helped a lot of people? The answer is yes. A lot of studies have been made in Israel and elsewhere, how schools that teach the faith in God are so much better in many, many ways than those that don't teach faith in God. Those that attend schools where God is taught don't have a problem with drugs. Kids that grew up with drugs and have become addicted, if they were introduced to religion, it made a big difference. It was very helpful to get them, I forget the word for it, to get them rehabilitated from the drugs or from alcohol. It's a known thing, it's a known fact that religion has been very helpful with the youth and with adults to be able to overcome certain addictions, certain problems. So it's not only the schools that are doing better, it's also people who have had all kinds of issues, all kinds of problems. As a result of belief in God, they've been able to overcome many of those problems and realize that all that they thought that brought them happiness, so-called happiness and satisfaction, was really vain, was really empty. And the true happiness and the true satisfaction came to them spiritually when they embraced religion, when they strengthened their connection to God. That is when they began to feel more meaning in their life and more satisfaction in what they do, true satisfaction. And this is obvious. This is from studies that were done in various locations, various countries, where it was clear that those who have adopted religion or faith in God in their life, it showed in many areas. It showed in marriage, where men and women who were not getting along as a result of becoming more religious, even if one of them became more religious, the level of tolerance grew for overlooking the other's faults. Because all of a sudden life took on a different direction, more meaningful direction, with purpose. And it wasn't just about making money and enjoying life, pleasures of life, all these vanities. It was more spiritual. So a spiritual home, a spiritual life, is definitely a healthier kind of life. And a spiritual life, we're talking about a spiritual life that is based on the foundation of faith in God. You can have people who are spiritual without that too. Yes, that's 100% true. But again, we were talking about something that is good for all times, something that does not change. Let's talk a little bit about change. People have come up with all kinds of beliefs and all kinds of values of their own. And those values and beliefs proved out to be wrong or proved to be inconsistent. In other words, double standards, as they would be called. Let's take an example, the Spaniards. The Spaniards, when they came to Mexico and they saw what the Aztecs were doing with human sacrifice, they were in complete shock. It was against their values. But these same Spaniards were willing to burn people because of their beliefs in Spain during the Inquisition. You see the double standards? Yes, they have certain standards, certain things were shocking and repulsive to them. But why did you do this in Spain to people who were citizens of your country just because they didn't believe in your God? When it's not based on faith in God or fear in God, it's not something that you can rely on. It's not something that will last. It will produce double standards. There's another problem also with human beings coming up with standards of their own. What right does the United States, for example, have to tell a country in Africa or Indonesia, cannibalism is wrong? You know what cannibalism is? To eat other human beings. Or to do whatever it is that they think is wrong. We believe it's wrong, but they believe it's right. Who's to say you are right and they are wrong? What makes you believe that their standards or their morals or their values are more correct than these people? We don't have more right than anybody else unless it's coming from God. If it's man-made, if human beings are the ones that are deciding what something is right, what is right and what is wrong, they have no more right than somebody else saying that to them this is right and this is wrong. Faith in God reminds us that we're created in the image of God. That we're not just animals, as I said before. In other words, that a lot is expected of us. That we have the ability to grow spiritually. We have the ability to become better people. But if we only follow what we believe is right and what we believe is wrong, it will not necessarily produce the human being, the crown of creation that God had in mind. It will be a human being more of an animal that will be prone to mistakes and not necessarily do what is right. In all the discussions about faith and evolution and all sorts of beliefs, you find there are many arguments between scientists about what is right and what is wrong, what makes sense and what does not make sense. Arguments abound, and it's okay for people to argue and to exchange ideas. You know when something is wrong? You know when something is fishy, when something is not right? When those who are arguing for what they think is right make fun of the other side, of their opponents. Then you know that this is not about the truth. People who want to know the truth, people who want to really arrive at the truth, figure things out properly, why make fun of anybody? Why rule out any option? Even if evolution were to be true, why rule out that God is the one that brought this about? One evolutionist said once, even if they were to disprove evolution, it still doesn't mean that God created the world. You see how far they've gone to not wanting to accept or ruling out the possibility that God exists. It's not even an option. So in their arguments, in their disputes, in trying to convince or in trying to disprove or whatever, many times their mechanism is to first deride, make fun of the other side. And whenever you see that, you should know it is indicative of somebody who's not out to look for the truth. Why would you make fun of the other individual? I have a good example where you can see the psychology behind their arguments or behind their beliefs. There's a very famous scientist, biochemist, who wrote some excellent books. He's an expert in his field. And when somebody was addressing him or writing about him or critiquing him, instead of calling him by his title, Dr. So-and-so, or this scientist, or this biochemist, he says, the creationists, so-and-so. He's already labeling him a creationist, meaning that he does not even consider that this man has a PhD, that this man is a scientist, that this man is an expert in his field, that this is one of his peers. No, he's less than him. He's a creationist. He's not one of ours. And Solomon has an explanation for this. He says, Zed Yahir, Let's Shemo. Who's a clown? Who's a mocker? One who is malevolent and he's arrogant. Malevolence and arrogance together is a mocker. One who mocks others, looks down at others, ridicules others' beliefs, just like that, without backing it up, of course. That says something about his human nature. It says something about, perhaps, about what he's trying to accomplish here. It's not seeking the truth. He's a mocker. And that mockery is coming from malevolence and arrogance. Then why are there so many disputes? And why are there so many disagreements? Why are there so many issues that cannot be resolved between scientists? Part of the reason is because as important as faith in God is, and as much as it is a foundation, and as we said before, a requirement really, in order for all that wisdom to be able to fall into place, for all that wisdom to be directed properly. Could you imagine if it's not directed properly, man makes atomic bombs to destroy. So that's what I'm talking about, directing all that wisdom properly to the right channels. So without that foundation, I mean, man is capable of all kinds of terrible things. So why should there be more and more disagreement about that? One of the reasons, or part of the problem is that a lot of people, when they're confronted with this foundation, the faith in God, they already have many questions about God. You want to tell me about God? You want to tell me about the foundation of God, of the faith in God? I have many questions and issues with God. I don't understand this, I don't understand. Wait a minute. Why start from the highest rung on the ladder? Start from the bottom. Start from scratch. You're starting all the way up there. You're expecting to know everything. You have all these questions. That's going to interfere with your honesty, with your honest pursuit of the truth. Start from scratch. Wait a minute. Does it make sense that God created the world? Does life have purpose and meaning? Start from zero. That's always a good thing to do. A lot of people have many questions and complaints about God that they never get themselves to the point of wanting to embrace this, wanting to make this part of their life. So a lot of these questions that cloud people's mind, cloud their judgment, and does not allow them to look at things more fundamentally. In other words, does this make sense that this came on by itself, or is it more likely that somebody designed it? Start from that question. Then take it one step at a time until, as we said earlier, there is knowledge, there is yediyah, to know something. And knowing means to internalize. Remember we said before about internalize? When a person internalizes something, it becomes a part of him. It becomes part of him because he's constantly aware of it. That is why a lot of people make the mistakes in thinking that you have to prove to me that God exists. Faith does not work like science, that you prove it in the same way you prove science. Faith means to believe. But it can be proven. There's a lot of evidence, but not at stage one. Stage one is to make certain assumptions. Stage one is to feel comfortable with it. Stage one is to accept the possibility of it. To begin to reason with it. That's step one. Step 2, 3, 4 takes you to knowing it, to proving it. And not everybody gets to step 4. Not everybody makes the time to read books, to observe creation, to take out his telescope, to go for a dive, scuba diving, and to look at all the wonders of creation, to be impressed with the migration of birds. Right? Not everybody has the time or the interest to go to that level of knowledge. That's deeper knowledge. Then there's the Kabbalah, the mystical knowledge. So it's gradual. So you can't make that a requirement. I will only believe if you prove it to me 100%. Wait a minute. You can't do that right away. First, start from step one. And eventually, maybe you'll internalize it. Because that's what faith is all about. Faith is an awareness. It's something that we internalize. It is not necessarily proven to us like science is. And that is a big problem because these guys who don't believe are putting the burden on those who do believe. Prove it. Prove it scientifically. It doesn't work like that. What is faith? Faith is faith. It's not necessarily meant to be proven. It can be proven. There's a lot of evidence for it. There's a lot of evidence. But you don't begin with the evidence. You begin with accepting it. You begin with some level of logic. And that comes from the soul. The soul that we have within us is capable of relating to this God because the soul is divine. But the problem is the soul is caged in a physical body with all kinds of desires and wants and resists, as we've said in previous lectures, this idea of, oh, this God is going to tell me what to do. Yeah, but the police tell you what to do. The government tells you what to do. You are told what to do all the time. And you follow. The doctor tells you what to do. You accept it blindly. He scribbled a prescription and you say, yes, this is holy. How do you know it's going to work? You know, doctors make a lot of mistakes too. But just because he wears a white gown, he's more believable to you? Right? So people don't think about that, you know. This could be helpful, the belief in God. It could be very, very helpful. And it's not just like that you're going to believe just 1, 2, 3, and it can easily be proven. Yes, it can be proven, but you don't begin with that. The whole idea of emunah is to internalize this awareness of God, not so much to prove it with facts like science. Because it's a belief that we feel, it's a belief that we are aware of. It's something that we internally can connect to because it's something spiritual. It's not something physical. You see, for example, with the two scientists who came up with the theory, was it two or was it one? No, one scientist that came up with the theory of the Big Bang. You heard about this? There's an acceptable explanation in the scientific world today that the world somehow came into existence through a Big Bang. Big explosion. What's interesting about it is that at least they admit that there's a beginning. Till then, they figured, you know, everything was around forever. Okay, there's a beginning, and it made a lot of scientists uncomfortable, of course, because the moment you say that there's a beginning, that's the story of Genesis. Okay, so he got, I think, a Nobel Prize for it, proving how the universe came about through a Big Bang. And then they asked him, well, and how did this come about? And why did it come about? How did this all get started? I don't want to think about that. He refused to address that question. That doesn't matter to him. That's not important. What you see is that a lot of these scientists, they do well trying to figure out why certain things happen, but they don't bother to figure out why or what the purpose of. In other words, I'm sorry, the scientists figure out how these things happen, but they don't bother figuring out why. Why? How could this be? For what reason? For what purpose? That they don't want to deal with. That's not science, they'll tell you. Leave that to the philosophers. Yeah, but why not? This is a very important question. Why did this come into existence? The way you say, the way you claim it did. No, I'll tell you how. I don't want to deal with the question of why. Obviously, they're bothered. It's something that they realize has certain consequences, this belief in God. The same thing happened with those who discovered the DNA, the two scientists who discovered pretty much the blueprint of creation, the signature of creation in everything, the DNA. And they asked them also, what do you don't you see that there is a God? Don't you see that there is something out there that this basically proves that there is design? Because that's what the DNA does. I mean, it's an incredible discovery that sheds a lot of light that there's some design over here. You know what they said? Yeah, you're right, there's no evolution. It must be that aliens from some other planet or universe came and seeded this planet with intelligent life. And they call that directed panspermia. To them, this makes more sense than to believe that there is a God. Look how far they're willing to go and to just discount the possibility that there's a God that created the world. Instead, all of these fanciful ideas. Everything is possible, everything is acceptable except for God. So what's the explanation for this? Why are they running away? Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, Solomon has an answer for this. In English, it's translated, for God made man straight, but they sought many intrigues. God made man straight. He's capable of figuring things out if he chooses to. But he seeks intrigues. He seeks all kinds of excuses to run away from it. What complicates, however, the situation, as I briefly touched on it last week, is another verse, that Zelumat Zeasa. God has made one correspondent to the other. What that means is that in order to enable free will to exist, for man to really be able to choose between believing and not believing, Zelumat Ze, God has had to make a world or a system where the belief is as much believable as the lack of belief. In other words, there will be enough power out there, enough things to tempt people to convince them that everything happened by itself through evolution or through some other form. In order for it to be free will. Otherwise, imagine if faith was common sense and very obvious and clear. Then you wouldn't need faith, right? Faith means that it's not so clear. There is an element of leap of faith that's required. You have to search it. You can discover it. And that's part of your mission. And that's only because we are enclosed in a human body, in a physical body, that we have these struggles, that we have these continuous battles of yes or no. And if there is a God, how does this happen? We don't have all the answers to all the questions. We will never have. While a human being is alive, it's not possible for him to know everything. Once he leaves this world, once he heads upstairs, then he knows the truth. In the meantime, this is one of his struggles. There are many, many things to tempt him. There's that serpent out there in different incarnations trying to lure him. Don't believe this. This is nonsense. But if one is, of course, honest and he realizes that this could make a big difference to his life, if he has this as a foundation, then he should take the time to try to figure it out and not ridicule it, not rule it out. At least give the benefit of the doubt to all those scientists who lived before you. Great men, great minds like Galileo Galilei and Isaac Newton. Give them the benefit of the doubt. Why did they live by this? Why did they accept this? Why was this so normal to them? They didn't even question it. Perhaps they knew something. Perhaps they were honest. Perhaps they sought the truth. Just would like to finish up with some of the issues that some people have regarding faith in God. Some people are amenable. In other words, they figure, okay, I'm willing to accept that there is a God, but I have a condition. I want to see a miracle. What would you say to them? Well, there's miracles right and left. There's many, many miracles. If you really look at life and you look at history, there are many examples of miracles. There's stories in the news of miracles. But let me tell you psychologically why this individual who asks for a miracle is not searching for the truth. He says he is open to it, but he's not. We have a rule that true believers don't need miracles, and those who don't want to believe, whatever miracle you show them, they won't accept. True believers don't need miracles. You don't need a miracle to be convinced. And one who does not want to believe, no miracle in the world will help convince him, because he's already made up his mind. Unfortunately, that's what you have today, is a lot of people who have already made up their mind. They don't want to be confused by any facts, any evidence whatsoever. They don't want to hear your arguments. They have ruled God out. With that kind of an attitude, with the mockery attitude, I mean, what do you expect? It is not possible for these kind of individuals to ever have an open mind to creation or to God. It's impossible. It's almost impossible. There have been a few scientists, however, the exceptions, who have believed in evolution, strong believers in evolution, but towards the end of their life they said it's wrong. They were honest enough to say that. And these are not religious people. There are some ex-evolutionists. Why? Why did they change their mind? Ask them. You know, those who have a problem with of course, with believing in God and are diehard believers in evolution. Ask ex-evolutionists. Don't ask creationists, don't ask religious people. Ask the ex-evolutionists who are scientists in their own right. What made you change your mind? Have a discussion, a dialogue with them, and they'll tell you the truth. So, a miracle will not make a difference. A miracle will not make a difference for another reason. There's a beautiful parable of a child who was a child prodigy. He knew how to play beautifully piano. And he was so good that the school where he performed gave him a certificate after testing him. After he demonstrated to them, they gave him a certificate and he hung it on his wall. His father was very proud of him. One day a guest came to see the father, and the father was telling this guest, this friend of his, my son, achieved a lot in this area of music. He's very good in playing the piano. He demonstrated in front of a lot of people. He got a certificate. And the friend said, I don't believe it. I want him to prove it to me. I want him to demonstrate it to me that he knows how to play. And the child said, no. That certificate on the wall is sufficient. That I did it once, that I demonstrated it, people heard me, saw me, they were happy, satisfied, and I got the certificate. Every time somebody comes to this house and asks me to prove it to them, I have to prove it all over again? No. And that's exactly what happens today. They want proof. But God proved himself once when he gave over the Torah to the Jewish people. It happened once when millions of people heard his voice. They were witnesses. No other religion can make this claim. That millions of people heard his voice. And they told us. They didn't lie to us, what they heard and what they experienced. This was a real experience for them. It wasn't witchcraft. They were convinced that this is God. They saw it. Does God have to prove it all over again? To every guy who's going to come up and ask, I want proof again. God, if you exist, I want you to speak to me too. I want you to perform miracles for me too. I already proved it once. And there's a certificate that is the Torah, where it says that I've done it. I'm not going to have to prove it time after time. I'm not going to do miracles time after time just to prove that I'm around. And you know what? He still does miracles. God still performs miracles, but we're not aware of all of them. Miracles happen every single day. But if somebody wants a miracle, wants proof, he's not necessarily going to get it the way he wants it. We must not forget, part of it is to enable free will. If everything was provable easily, then we would be like puppets. God doesn't want a world of puppets. He wants there to be equal choice between doing what is right and doing what is wrong for reasons that only He knows. He wants us to be able to deal with the challenges of life in order to reward us with the ultimate good, as the Kabbalah teaches. He wants us to earn our ticket to the world to come by doing the right things, not by automating the system. If that's all He wanted was puppets, He could have done that too. No, He wants people to earn their share to the world to come. He wants them to earn it by doing the right things, by performing good deeds. That's His way. He chose to do it that way. So therefore, He's not going to prove it every single time. Because of the difficulties, nonetheless, in believing in God, in having pure faith in God, especially in our times, in our generation, I just put together a quick list of some suggestions that can help people strengthen their faith and arrive at this conclusion that God in fact does exist. For the Jewish people, we have a tradition that learning Torah is very, very important, because not only will the Torah guide us, the Torah has a tremendous amount of spiritual light that will enable the soul to see with greater clarity. And the soul is what ultimately connects with God. So through learning Torah, one is able to reach that awareness. Especially in the generation, right before Mashiach comes, where the rabbis tell us we will be at the lowest level of impurity. That 50th level of impurity is called heresy, kfirah. In order to be able to avoid falling into that trap, and for those who are there already, in order to be able to come out of it, the only thing that can help us is the Torah. The Torah is able to draw us even from the pits, from the lowest level of impurity. Since truth, the rabbis tell us, is very heavy, and that is why few are willing to bear it, truth is heavy. Not everybody wants to commit themselves to it. It's heavy. It requires a person to discipline himself and to assume certain responsibility, and that is why few people are willing to bear it. What could help, therefore, is for a person to restrain his appetites, his desires. By doing so, he sanctifies himself. He gives more strength to his soul than to his physical body. He's therefore going to have an easier time figuring out the truth, realizing that there is a God. People who are immersed in their desires, in their appetites, and they just don't care about how much they eat and how much they do, or whatever it is that brings them physical pleasures, this will always be a difficulty for them, because pleasures and physicality is the opposite of spirituality. They don't get along. And this also hampers or makes it difficult for a person to believe. So restraining oneself, limiting oneself in that area will enable a person to be holier, and it will be easier for him to believe in God. For those who are not Jewish, of course, it's always advisable to start from scratch, from zero. A lot of people start from above. In other words, they already have their mind set on what they want to believe. Start from scratch. You don't know anything. Ask people who, if you have any questions, ask people who are knowledgeable and get the answers you need to those questions. So starting from scratch is very, very important, because if you don't start from scratch and you're already starting with the assumption that this theory is right and science is 100% correct, then that's going to make it more difficult. Start from scratch. You don't know anything. You don't know from nothing. No belief in God, and no science, and no nothing. And begin to ask questions, and step by step, if one is honest, he should arrive at the right conclusion, that there is a God, that there is a creator. God does not make it that difficult. He does give us a free will. We do have a free will to decide and to choose, but it's not that difficult, or it's impossible, as long as we're honest and we have an open mind. Finally, one of the suggestions that is one of my favorite is talk the truth. Person who gets used to this quality of always speaking the truth, never lying, admitting his faults, admitting when he's wrong, always say the truth no matter how costly it may be to you. And sometimes it is costly. People don't always like to tell the truth. Never lie. Always get used to always saying the truth. So this quality of being truthful will hopefully also facilitate it for one to arrive at the truth. This is the last generation before Mashiach is coming. I have no doubt about it. And we have a tradition that it is during this generation where Hashem will destroy Amalek. Amalek is that evil force that's out there that cools people's faith, that tries to detach us from our connection to God. That's called Amalek. Forget about people being associated with Amalek. Whatever wars you see down here below is also a spiritual war between the forces of good and evil. So whatever is playing out there is playing down here. And it's somewhat a reflection of what's going on. All these wars. And the biggest war of all, of course, is the war with Amalek. And the Torah tells us that this war with Amalek has been ongoing forever. And because of that force out there called Amalek, God's throne is not complete. What does that mean? That means that there appears to be no justice, there appears to be no God, because God is being concealed. There's a concealment of this God. Part of it is an intentional concealment in order to allow free will, but part of it is because of the forces of evil that they are at their very, very end. They're about to be destroyed and removed. And they're fighting so hard in trying to inundate the world with heresy. If you look at it, analyze the situation, you will realize that that is exactly what's happening. But very, very soon, as the Torah says, Hashem, Yimcheh Zecher Amalek mitachat hashamayim. He will destroy any vestige left of this evil force called Amalek. And at that point, B'ezrat Hashem, the truth will be revealed to all.